Good morning, Paradise Valley. Welcome to January's edition of Coffee with a Cop. We have a special presentation today. Shay Painter from Child Help is joining us. Shay is the Children's Justice State Coordinator and has been working in the field for about 3 years. Child Help is one of the largest nonprofit child abuse prevention and treatment organizations in the nation. And over the last 62 years, Child Help has impacted over 11 million children's lives. Welcome, Shay, and thanks for joining us today. And you can start with your presentation when you're ready.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Chief. Well, welcome, everyone. I am happy to be here. Like the Chief said, and like the screen here says, I'm going to kind of talk about the investigation of child abuse today, just to kind of educate you on what does happen. We'll go over a couple of key terms, a couple of key roles. I'll chat for 20, maybe 25 minutes, and then I'll open it up for questions. You guys are going to be getting a very simple kind of breakdown of what this entails. But if anything sparks your interest or you're curious, if I mention a training that I do, you're more than welcome to reach out, and I will go over these things more in depth, either for you or for your organization. And all education and training that I provide is entirely free to the community. So I'll kind of go ahead and get started. So first, there we go. I would love to talk about an advocacy center and what that is. So Child Help is an advocacy center. It's also a national organization, but we have 2 advocacy centers in the country. One is located in Phoenix and our other is located in Tennessee. And then we have other family advocacy centers throughout the county. So what an advocacy center is it is a place where individuals can go when they have been victimized of a felony crime. So typically this is going to be physical abuse and or sexual abuse. And occasionally we will see extreme cases of neglect, but they need to be really, really intense, as neglect is not always a felony crime. And again, we really work with those felony crimes at our center and at other centers. Our goal at Child Help is to provide a child appropriate and child friendly facility. We really want to make sure that we are aware of the child's trauma. We are aware of everything that's been going on. So they come into our center and we have all of these different agencies at our center. We have law enforcement at our center. Typically, we have detectives. At Child Help, we house roughly 55 to 60 detectives that all work in the Crimes Against Children's unit. And then there are 7 sergeants in our facility and a lieutenant and all that good stuff. And then we have a branch of Department of Child Safety in our facility as well. So a lot of us know DCS as CPS, right? I hear the community saying Child Protective Services, CPS. We don't use that term here in Arizona anymore. We use DCS, and that stands for Department of Child Safety. And then they have a branch called OCWI, which is the Office of Child Welfare Investigations, and they handle all felony crimes, right? So DCS typically handles neglect crimes, when parents are on drugs and unable to care for their children, then that is handled by Department of Child Safety. If the parents are on drugs and then that child ingests drugs, now we've just crossed into a felony crime, and now Office of Child Welfare Investigations, as well as my center, will get involved. We also have something called a forensic medical professional, and that is simply doctors that are aware of child abuse and what that looks like. So not all doctors can look at an injury and say, yes, this is abuse, right? So our doctors are trained if a child has a spiral fracture then the doctor is able to say, hey, this is a spiral fracture and this was caused by a twisting and pulling mechanism. And parent is saying that it's due to child falling off the couch, and that is inconsistent. And then I will, or our agencies will then kind of go from there and begin an investigation. So we have PCH at our center, Phoenix Children's Hospital. They provide us with 3 doctors, 2 nurse practitioners, and a SANE nurse. And SANE stands for Sexual Assault Nursing Examiner. We have something called a forensic interviewer, and forensic interviewers are individuals who will sit down with the child, and they are trained specifically how to question a child, right? So when a child is victimized, we have to be very careful about how we ask them questions, because there are things called suggestive questions and leading questions. And if we ask a child a leading question, and an example could be, where on the teddy bear did he touch you? Right? We could ask that to a child, or we might think we can, but that's actually a really, really bad question to ask a child, because it's very leading and it's very suggestive. And we are enhancing the chances that that child is going to lie to us. You know, on top of that, teddy bears are not anatomically correct. And so it just causes a lot of problems in the court of law. So our forensic interviewers are there to allow us to ask children very specific questions that are not leading or not suggestive. And this just holds up in the courtroom a little bit better. We have counselors in our center, and at Child Help, we have the largest amount of counselors at any advocacy center in the county. We have 10 therapists that are all trained in EMDR, which is a form of trauma therapy. And they are all, so we pay them, but we do not charge victims, right? So everything's pro bono. We do charge insurance if the family has insurance, but if the family doesn't have insurance, then Child Help fronts the bill, and they never age out. So let's say a 16-year-old victim comes to our center, they begin therapy, and then they turn 18 and they're still not over their victimization, we will not kick them out. We will keep working with them. There's no such thing as aging out. And then, of course, we also have victim advocates. These allow families to receive resources once a child has been victimized. So if the family are not legal citizens, then we can provide them with certain tools, certain applications to allow them to get visas very quickly, because we now need them to stay in the US if it's going to trial and other things of that nature. So that's kind of all the agencies that work in an advocacy center. And I know that's a lot. I know you're drinking from a fire hose right now, and it's a lot of information, but I think it's really important for us to sit down with the community and kind of explain what a center is and what all of these agencies do and who they are. Because I think for a lot of us, when we hear about child abuse or we hear about mandated reporting, there's this really ominous, mysterious tone and backdrop behind that. We don't really know what that means, right? I think we've all probably heard of having to call the police or having to call DCS when there's something going on with a child, but really not understanding what that means. And I think a lot of our community believes that, you know, DCS will come in and remove the child from a family and then they never see their child again. And this is me assuring you that that does not happen. We remove children last case scenario, and we only do it if it is very clear that the environment is unsafe. We do not like to rip children away. And if there is a crime that we are investigating, that child is going to end up at an advocacy center, right? So they're either going to end up at Child Help. If they're in Phoenix, we handle all Phoenix cases. Sometimes we'll see cases in other areas just because our center is so much larger than the rest of the centers. There are 7 centers located in Maricopa County. So we have Child Help Children's Center. which we only handle child crimes at our center, and then all the rest of the family advocacy centers. So we have one in Glendale, one in Chandler, one in Mesa, one in Scottsdale, one in Goodyear, and then we have a Phoenix Family Advocacy Center that's actually located above Child Help. The family advocacy centers can see children and or adults, and the adult crimes that they typically see are going to be domestic violence, sexual assault, missing persons, and any crime occurring to an adult that is no longer their own guardian. So an adult with a seriously mentally ill diagnosis, right, when we would need to get adult protected services involved, or someone that is elderly and no longer their own guardian due to maybe Alzheimer's or dementia or something of that nature. And the detectives will handle all of those adult crimes. Every center has different agencies co-located in it. Again, Child Help is the biggest one. I'm going to go back here real quick. So kind of my position and what I do is I train the community on something called mandated reporting, which I'll get into in just a minute, kind of a brief snippet of what that is. And then I facilitate case reviews throughout the entire county at all of the different centers. So when we have a case that the injury is very severe, or we have a case where protocol was breached, maybe one of the agencies made a whoopsie and we want to effectively address that so it doesn't happen again, then we'll pull that case and we'll review it. Phoenix oversees roughly 500 cases of child abuse per month, unfortunately. And the other centers are going to be seeing anywhere between 20 and 90 cases. 90 would be a little high, but could happen, of child abuse per month. So again, this is the advocacy center model. We go ahead and we put the victim in the center and we surround them with services. We also are very cautious to not ask children how many, multiple times about their victimization. And I think that's important for community members. If you are interacting with children and a child states that they've been victimized, please do not ask them over and over and over again. You might think you're just trying to get the right answers. The problem is you're re-traumatizing that child, and you're making them relive it. On top of that, I don't know if anyone here has kids or works with kids, but if you do, you would know that when you ask a child the same question more than once, you do not get the same answer. And that's very problematic when it comes to the investigation of a child abuse, if we have all of these different stories from the child. And it's not necessarily the child's fault. They are inclined to tell us what we think we want to hear. I mean, heck, I'm an adult, and if someone keeps asking me the same question over and over, I might think, do I need to change my answer? They're obviously not liking it, right? And kids are so susceptible to that. So please make sure if you ever come across a situation where a child is disclosing physical or sexual abuse or neglect, that we're not asking them questions over and over. We like to ask what I call the 4 W's, which is what, who, when, and where, right? We want to ask the child what happened, where they were when it happened, who did it, and when this event occurred. Once we have those answers to those 4 questions, and only those 4 questions, then we go ahead and call law enforcement and or DCS depending on the crime. This is Child Help. This is our facility. As you can see, it's very child friendly with blue and purple and very colorful walls. And we do this on purpose. We want the child to feel safe. You know, if they disclose to a community member, to their teacher, to their therapist, that can spark an investigation, but they have to disclose to our agencies in order for us to do something. So if they come all the way down to our center and they don't disclose because they're not ready or they're scared, then there's nothing we can do, right? And so many individuals don't disclose because they're not ready, especially if it was something that was found out, right? So in sexual assault cases of children, if someone walks in on the event and the child never disclosed, they might not disclose to us, right? We've had incidences where mom walked in on dad doing something inappropriate to daughter, and we question daughter about it, and daughter just refuses to say anything. And it's very obvious that something had happened, but she's just not ready. And so in that incident, we would provide her with therapy services until she's ready to disclose, and we would put the investigation on hold. Here's some statistics about child abuse. Unfortunately, this is just a rough topic, so especially at 7:30 in the morning. So I do apologize for essentially ruining your morning. It's not my intent. I do believe this is an important topic for us to be more aware of. So we do know that a child abuse report is made every 10 seconds in the US. We know that more than 4 children die every day as a result of child abuse. We know that more than 90% of juvenile sexual abuse victims know their offender in some way. That's really important, and I want to hone in on that statistic for a second, okay? A lot of us think that sexual offenders, pedophiles, if you will, their their presence essentially looks like they're typically a creepy man, typically white, and they have a creepy van, according to the public, that they park outside of parks and schools, and they use puppies and candies to lure children in, right? That's what people think of when they think of a sexual offender. And that is so far from wrong. That's maybe 1% of sexual offenders. That is a stereotype that media has highlighted, and it's just not correct. Sexual offenders are typically entrusted to care for the child, their family, friends. They have clout in the community. Heaven forbid they're a teacher or a churchgoer, or right, and they typically don't give you the heebie jeebies. They're not social pariahs. They do pay their taxes, and they don't have a criminal background. So it's really important that we look out for that. And when children are displaying that they are uncomfortable around certain adults or disclosing that we do not dismiss that despite the community members' clout, right? We always want to take the child's word for it. Please understand that children typically do not lie about abuse, and they do not fantasize about abuse. Okay, we do have something that's called a fantastical disclosure, and this is common in children 0 to 7. Well, verbal to 7, right? 3, 4 when they start talking to 7 years old, or children older than 7 that have developmental delays. And what a fantastical disclosure is it's when a child is explaining the narrative of their victimization, and they bring in fantasy like events. So we had a 4-year-old that was being molested by his grandfather. He was explaining the events to us, and then he stated that Spider-Man came in through the kitchen window, shot his grandfather in the face with a spider web, and then they went and got ice cream. Right? Obviously, this didn't happen. Spider-Man didn't save the day, unfortunately, for this little boy, but that's something his brain needed to concoct in order to deal with the trauma and deal with what was going on, right? So a lot of us as adults, when we hear a disclosure like that and we hear those fantasy events, we immediately say, oh, it's a fantasy. We don't need to report this. It's just kids being, they've got wild imaginations. Well, unfortunately, children don't fantasize about abuse. They shouldn't know what it is. So we need to take those disclosures very seriously, and we still need to report them. We also know that our kiddos 0 to 3 are the most at risk for fatal abuse. Okay, 0 to 3, and then 90% of all fatalities that are due to abuse and neglect are 0 to 5. So our 0 to 5 population is the most at risk, and that's for a couple of reasons. They're nonverbal. Oftentimes, they're more fragile. They're home all the time. So it's causing more stress on the parents. And most importantly, they're not going to school. So they're not around mandated reporters. And mandated reporters can spot abuse and then call it in, which is so important. And that just goes to show that calling in abuse it does save lives, right? We know that tenfold, and it is okay to call on a family. I think a lot of us think that if we call on a family for child abuse, that we're going to ruin the family's life. And that is not the case. If there is no evidence of abuse, then there's nothing we can do, right? We're no longer in a time frame where we can just take someone's word for it. We have to have evidence. We have to have reasoning. Even if the child says that they're being abused, but we have nothing else to go on, we still can't necessarily remove and set. There's a lot that goes into it. So please understand that if you feel uncomfortable about a situation, you should always call. It's not public record if DCS is investigating a family, right? They're not going to get their job called. They're not going to lose their job. Sometimes we can't even remove children when there is abuse going on because we can't prove it. So we're definitely not removing children if there's no abuse going on. Please know that. And I know that, we've had past situations that media has highlighted and has kind of struck fear in the community. And we have really come leaps and bounds from that. So I kind of already talked about this bit. I'm not going to discuss this portion. Well, I will, I guess. So if you were to call law enforcement or Department of Child Safety, they have something called P1s, P2s, and P3s, and this just stands for priority. So P1 is someone is in imminent danger, right? Law enforcement, they basically get there as soon as possible. DCS has 2 hours to investigate a priority one. So they do have different response times. DCS doesn't have as many individuals as law enforcement does, and so law enforcement can normally arrive on scene much quicker. So we do typically encourage that law enforcement is called as well as DCS. So I've used this term mandated reporter a lot throughout this presentation, or this discussion, if you will. Some of you may know what that means, some of you may not. So a mandated reporter, there's actually laws on mandated reporting. And I do a 2-hour training of that law. So if you happen to be a mandated reporter and you're familiar with it, but not entirely, or maybe you have staff that needs to be trained, please reach out to me. I'll give my contact information here in a bit. I do a 2-hour in-depth training of all of these laws. And what a mandated reporter is, the essence is you have a job that makes you a mandated reporter. So all law enforcement are mandated reporters. All mental health therapists are mandated reporters. Doctors, dentists, right? The medical field is mandated reporters. All school personnel is mandated reporters. Daycare personnel, and then essentially anyone that works with children is a mandated reporter, coaches, tutors, etc. And that means that by law, if they are aware of abuse or they suspect abuse at any point, they must report that abuse. And I go into who to report to and what we report on and all that good stuff, but that's kind of what the term mandated reporting is. Now, please know that even if you aren't a mandated reporter and you're not required by law to report, we highly encourage that the whole community report when something's going on, because it does save lives and it is so helpful. We call that discretionary reporters. So I did go ahead and jot down the DCS hotline for you. And this is a 24-hour, 365 number. So you can call whenever, Christmas Day at 2 a.m., right? Someone will pick up. And this hotline is for all of Arizona. So all crimes occurring in Arizona, anywhere geographically, you can call this number and report it. And then you can also call law enforcement. I'm almost done here. So When we are making a call, if it's sexual assault, we always want to call law enforcement. A lot of us think, oh, it's a child crime, we should call DCS. Not necessarily, because law enforcement does have better times and they need to get involved anyway if it's a felony crime. So for sex assault, we always call law enforcement. For physical abuse, we call law enforcement if we have a disclosure from a child and there's a mark on the child. And then if you only have a disclosure from a child about physical abuse or just a mark, then we only call DCS. For minor on minor crimes, so let's say little Tommy sexually assaults little Susie, that would be a minor on minor crime, and that would be only law enforcement. And then for neglect, including domestic violence, because we should be calling on domestic violence crimes. Not a lot of us know that, but if there is a domestic violence situation and there is a child in that home and we are aware that they are witnessing that, that absolutely is a crime and it absolutely warrants DCS involvement. So if we are aware of domestic violence where there are children, we want to go ahead and call on that. We also want to call on the solicitation of minors. So a lot of us think that if some creepy gentleman asks us, typically a female, a teenage female, for pictures or something like that, and she says no, well then us as adults, we say, oh, well, nothing really happened, so we don't call. But solicitation is a crime and a felony one at that. So these are all kind of things that I've noticed the community and even myself not knowing about. And so that's kind of what I wanted to share with you guys today. Unfortunately, we only have about a half an hour and there's just so much, but this is just a really, really quick synopsis and overview. And with that, I will take any questions, as well as this is my contact info and my personal number. I always give out my cell so you can call for any questions you may have, and I'll leave it to questions.
I don't see any questions just yet. You can always reach out to us and we can again connect you with Child Help if you have any questions related to this topic here.
I'm going to take a moment and introduce Councilmember Anna Thomason. Councilmember Thomason has been the liaison for the Advisory Committee on Public Safety for the last couple of years, and we're just happy to have her with us today. Councilmember Thomason, welcome to Coffee with a Cop. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Chief, thank you so much, and Officer McGee, always a pleasure to join. Shay, I just wanted to thank you for taking the time to visit our community virtually, and thank you for explaining the system to us. If we understand a system better, it's easier for us to participate and advocate for the children in our community. So thank you so much.
I couldn't agree more. Thanks for having me, you guys.
Shay, thanks for joining us this morning. It doesn't look like we have any questions, so that means you covered what you covered thoroughly. Very appreciative of you joining us this morning, and Paradise Valley is going to go back and get their second cup. So thank you very much.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Have a good one.
All right.
Thank you.
You too.
See you later.
See ya.